A tourist confident in his immunity reached for the royal guard's sword, but one unexpected move made the crowd gasp, turning his boldness into a humiliating spectacle. The brisk morning breeze swept through the historic city of Edinburgh, Scotland, bringing life to its cobbled streets. Outside the gates of Edinburgh Castle, a sea of tourists bustled with excitement, snapping photos and exchanging animated remarks. Among them stood a royal guard, a solitary figure in his immaculate scarlet tunic, a tall bearskin hat framing his stoic expression, and a ceremonial sword glinting at his side. The guard, 27-year-old Robert McAllister, embodied unwavering discipline, his posture as sharp as the steel blade he carried. For Robert, standing post at the castle was an honor, a chance to uphold centuries of tradition. The crowds ebbed and flowed, their chatter buzzing like a hive, but Robert stood still, a silent sentinel. He was unbothered by the laughter, the jokes, or even the occasional mockery from tourists. But that day, his patience would face an unprecedented test. Among the crowd emerged a loud, overconfident tourist. His name was Jake Matthews, a 25-year-old from the United States, clad in shorts patterned with the American flag, a neon yellow t-shirt declaring, "Scotland is my playground," and a backward baseball cap. His swagger matched his grin as he strolled forward, phone in hand, capturing every moment for his online audience. "Hey man, are you real, or just one of those fancy statues?" Jake called out, laughing as he edged closer to Robert. The crowd parted, some giggling at the tourists' antics while others exchanged disapproving glances. But Jake didn't care. He thrived on attention and believed the royal guard was the perfect prop for his performance. Robert, ever composed, remained still, his eyes fixed forward. Jake's grin widened at the guard's silence. "Come on, buddy, crack a smile," he shouted, waving a hand in front of Robert's face. The crowd's amusement began to waver, replaced by unease. Despite the mounting tension, Robert didn't flinch, his unyielding stance speaking louder than any words. Sensing his audience growing restless, Jake decided to up the ante. "Well, if you won't react, maybe I'll just give you something to react to." He took a step closer, his eyes fixed on the ceremonial sword at Robert's side. The crowd gasped audibly, cameras aimed at the unfolding spectacle. Jake leaned in, his hand extending toward the ornate weapon. The atmosphere grew thick with tension as Jake crossed the invisible boundary of respect. "What's the matter? Too serious to have fun?" Jake taunted, though his voice now carried a hint of hesitation. His friends snickered from a distance, egging him on. "You're embarrassing yourself," an older man in the crowd muttered loudly, leaning on a walking cane. "These guards stand for honor, not your cheap entertainment." Jake scoffed but felt his confidence falter under the weight of the guard's silence and the crowd's disapproval. Still, the laughter of his companions spurred him on. With a dramatic flourish, Jake pulled a coin from his pocket and tossed it at Robert's feet. "Here's a tip for standing so still," he jeered, expecting laughter from the crowd. The coin hit the cobblestones with a faint clink, rolling to a stop near Robert's polished boot. Instead of laughter, a hush fell over the onlookers. Some shook their heads in disdain, others muttered quietly. "Shameful," the elderly man said, glaring at Jake. But Jake, blinded by his need for validation, grinned at his friends. "Watch and learn," he declared. Determined to force a reaction, he boldly crossed the white line marking the restricted area around the guard. Phones were raised once again, the crowd collectively holding its breath. With exaggerated movements, Jake reached for Robert's sword, his fingers brushing the air inches from its hilt. Just as the tension peaked, Robert acted. His movements were swift and deliberate, a sharp step forward, his boot striking the cobblestones with a thunderous sound that reverberated through the courtyard. "Sir, you have crossed a restricted area." "Step back immediately," Robert commanded, his voice low and firm, carrying the authority of centuries of tradition. Jake stumbled back as though struck by an invisible force, his confidence shattered. His face drained of color, the grin replaced with a look of disbelief. The crowd erupted into murmurs of admiration and laughter, their respect for Robert palpable. "That's incredible," someone whispered, sparking a ripple of appreciative chuckles. "Care to continue?" the elderly man asked sarcastically, his sharp gaze pinning Jake in place. Looking around, Jake searched for support from his friends, but they offered none. Flustered, he stammered, "Well, okay, Mr. Serious, relax." His voice cracked, betraying his unease. As Robert returned to his stance, the crowd buzzed with chatter. Some clapped, others shook their heads at Jake's antics. But one thing was clear. The tourists' overconfidence had met its match. The courtyard settled into a tense calm, the buzz of chatter softening after Jake's failed attempt to provoke the guard. But Jake, unwilling to accept defeat, glanced around at the crowd. His face was flushed, and a flicker of desperation crossed his expression as he struggled to reclaim the spotlight. Near the fence, the sound of a child's cry broke through the murmurs. A young boy, no more than 7, clung to his mother's hand, pointing toward Jake with tear-filled eyes. "Mommy, he's being mean to the soldier," the boy sobbed, his small voice ringing out in the stillness. Robert's gaze shifted slightly, his disciplined stoicism momentarily softened by the child's distress. The subtle movement didn't go unnoticed by the crowd, heightening the tension in the air. Jake, noticing the renewed focus on him, smirked, mistaking it for an opportunity to regain control. "Oh, come on. What's the big deal?" Jake shouted, waving his arms theatrically. His eyes darted back to Robert's sword. "Let's see if the tough guy does anything this time," he declared, his voice laced with defiance. Ignoring the murmurs of disapproval, Jake lunged forward, his hand reaching for the sword's hilt. The crowd collectively gasped, phones once again raised to capture the scene. But just as his fingers grazed the blade, Robert moved. The guard's actions were calculated and precise. With a sharp half-step backward and a subtle tilt of his torso, Robert dodged the tourist's grasp. The sudden movement caught Jake off guard, and he lost his balance. His feet slipped on the cobblestones, and with a loud, awkward thud, he crashed to the ground. For a moment, the courtyard fell into stunned silence. Then, like a spark igniting a flame, the elderly man's voice rang out. "Karma!" Laughter erupted from the crowd, rolling over Jake like a tidal wave. Cameras zoomed in on his humiliated figure sprawled on the ground, his once smug expression replaced with shock and embarrassment. The laughter grew louder, joined by cheers and claps of approval for Robert's dignified response. Jake scrambled to his feet, brushing dirt from his clothes. His face burned red, his eyes darting around as he tried to salvage his dignity. "It was just a joke," he mumbled weakly, forcing a smile that fooled no one. "Disrespectful," someone in the crowd shouted, their voice dripping with disdain. Nearby, the young boy, still clutching his mother's hand, smiled through his tears. Robert, noticing the child's gaze, broke his stance once more. He marched toward the boy with measured steps, his every movement exuding purpose and precision. The crowd instinctively parted, creating a clear path for the guard. When he reached the boy, Robert bent slightly, lowering himself to the child's level. "It's all right, young sir. That man won't bother anyone anymore," he said, his voice calm and reassuring. The boy wiped his tears, his face lighting up with a shy smile. The mother nodded at Robert, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she said softly, pulling her son into a hug. The crowd burst into applause, the sound echoing through the courtyard. "Now that's a real hero," someone exclaimed, their words summing up the collective admiration. Phones captured the heartfelt moment, ensuring Robert's actions would be remembered far beyond the castle gates. Jake, still standing awkwardly nearby, glanced at the sea of cameras pointed at him. Panic flickered in his eyes as he realized his humiliation was now immortalized in countless videos. One woman, holding her phone aloft, grinned as she announced, "This is going viral. Meme of the year, right here." The crowd roared with laughter, and Jake's attempt to protest was drowned out. "Come on, it was just a joke," he pleaded, but his voice lacked conviction. The crowd's disdainful murmurs and mocking laughter left him no room for redemption. At that moment, a uniformed police officer emerged from the crowd, his steps deliberate and authoritative. "Sir, you need to leave the area immediately," the officer said firmly, his gaze unwavering. Jake opened his mouth to argue, but stopped when he met the officer's steady eyes. Shoulders slumping, he obeyed, retreating with what little dignity he had left. The crowd watched in silence as he disappeared into the throng, his bravado replaced by shame. As order returned to the courtyard, Robert resumed his post. He adjusted his ceremonial sword, ensuring it remained in perfect condition, and stood tall once more, his unflappable composure a testament to his discipline. The young boy waved at Robert, and the guard responded with a subtle nod, a small gesture that drew another round of applause from the crowd. "Now that's professionalism," someone remarked. "A true hero of our time," added the elderly man with the cane, his respect for the guard evident. As the crowd began to disperse, their conversations buzzed with excitement over the spectacle they had witnessed. Videos of the incident, already circulating online, were accompanied by captions celebrating the Royal Guard's honor and resilience. For Robert, it was just another day on duty. But for those who had witnessed the event, he stood as a living reminder of the power of dignity, discipline, and respect in the face of provocation.